Hello, I believe that we are live. Just a 2.5 minutes. This bar says it's happening slowly, but I think the lesson is we already are live. Friends in the chat, if you could say hi. We've learned all day that sometimes our friends just stare at us in the chat. Don't do that. Tell us that we're live so we know that we are in fact live, because there's such an awkward, painful thing when we're staring at them. And I'm able to see that there are people here, so I know that you are here watching. As you drop in the chat and tell me that you're here, so I learned people are here, I'm going to introduce this session. So, hi, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and CEO, technically. Thank you for being introduced today. A big old daily conference on building better companies. What has happened over the last 10 years, we technically have done a ton of reporting on, is the dynamics are changing in the hiring process. So especially among technologists and the most coveted knowledge workers, there's more power in the hands of these coveted professionals. So one way that organizations are adapting is, telling a story about why the heck someone would want to work there. The wonky, nerdy phrase is employer brand marketing, but don't let that terrify you. We're mostly talking about how do you tell a story about what it's like to work in a place, particularly in a way that would attract the professionals who you want to join your team. So we're gonna talk a bit about what are some real life tips on doing that. And to do that, I got my friend Mawulom, the head of talent for LTSE, the largely remote fintech company, the long-term stock exchange. I also have Mandy, chief of staff over there at Crossbeam, the data partnership startup. And we will be joined momentarily by our friend Jason Bannon, VP of Marketing Comms at Ben Prango Technology Partners, state-backed investment firm. So they both do some EB internally, but they also their portfolio at this. So that's the setup. We're going to stop me chattering away. Mawulom, employee value proposition. This is either a phrase that everyone finds really wonky and is total buzz nonsense, or is a total foundation, and we at Technically at least find a full range. Are you guys using employee value proposition? Is that like super wonky in the weeds or a total necessity? If not, just talk to me about how you are starting the basic of why would anyone want to work here?
Great question, and thank you so much for hosting us.
Thanks for being here.
So in terms of employee value proposition, are we using that when we engage candidates? Not specifically. We first seek to understand the candidate's disposition. And by that, I mean, what are their motivators? What are they seeking in the next role? What type of impact are they looking to make? And then from there, we get a snapshot of what matters most to them. And then we present our opportunity. Our head of marketing is doing a phenomenal job. So our brand is becoming more well-known still. Candidates don't always know what it's like to actually work at LTSE. So we take the information that we've gathered. Hey, you made it. Marketing is doing a phenomenal job. So our brand is becoming.
Oh, wow, we're hearing you. Oh, again, I will reintroduce Jason, but you keep going, Mawulom, and I will come back to Jason.
Perfect. Jason, I love the Philly in the back, love the tempo. And for those of you who heard me twice, not sure what happened there. But when it comes to next steps, after we gather the information from the candidates and what matters most to them, and then we create a compelling message by positioning our company realistically. And by this, I mean, what can we share that
realistically? I'm going to make you talk about in a moment, but keep going. Yeah. I think that's an important point there.
Wholeheartedly agree, because we want them to stay here and come for the long term. And so we want to paint an actual picture of what's going on here. And so actually, I'll share a story because that might actually bridge the gap. I connected with a candidate recently and they value their time off. However, their current organization, although they had unlimited leave, they weren't able to take leave due to planning a number of other things. So after sharing our unlimited leave policy, I highlighted the structure we've put in practice so that we can work sustainably. And for us, that means not only do we have unlimited vacation, but we have a minimum vacation policy. So our employees must take 3 weeks off a year outside of corporate holidays. You must take 1 full week off every 6 months. And that presented our opportunity realistically. Our aim is for candidates to walk away imagining what their lives could be if they join our organization. If that future that they're painting is a dream that pulls them forward, that's phenomenal. If it's not, it's okay too. We want to attract the right people. So it's less about working for us versus other companies, and more about what's ideal for the candidate. What type of life could they have if they work with us? And if that life is the best that they can imagine, then sure, have them come over.
Mm. Mom, just for a little bit of context, remind us, what's rough head count of LTSE?
Right now, we're hovering under 50.
Okay, and you guys are largely remote?
Large remote. I think the pandemic has made most companies remote, but essentially we have headquarters in San Francisco as well as New York, but our team is distributed throughout the U.S.
Yeah, that's just a little bit of context. Mandy, I'll end up asking the same questions, but something that builds on Mawulom so I'm obsessed from a reporting perspective on technology companies, how in the last 10 years, content marketing on the sales side went from, fringe waste of resources to a dominant narrative in every SaaS company's sales strategy. Hey, we're going to build a community, or we're going to use, storytelling to drive leads. I'm obsessed with how I feel like we're seeing the beginnings of that on the HR and recruiting front. We have to tell a story to get, top of the funnel awareness to eventually move qualified folks down. I call this out because I know Crossbeam, you guys are quite adept at the content marketing side of things. Is that a comparison you guys are yet making? Do you even just see that connection on the employee brand marketing versus sales oriented content marketing?
Yeah, so Crossbeam, just for a little context to get, we're in our third year and just hit 55 total headcount. I was lucky to be one of the first folks to join our co-founders early on. And what I'd say about our content marketing, that team is fire. They're amazing. They are part of how we present ourselves as a company to work, because the people are the product. That it's also interrelated. So we partner strongly with our head of content, Sean Blanda, and his team, and our graphic designer, and the entire team, to tell the story about what it's like to work at Crossbeam. The thing that we keep coming back to, and when I was doing some thinking on this topic coming into this panel, is when you are proud of where you work, employment branding is easy. Employer branding is easy. And we're just telling the story that our employees are living. And so, the content marketing piece really works step in step with our product story, and they evolve sort of together. So that's my take on it, is that they're an integral part of how we tell the story of how to work at Crossbeam, and partner with our content team very closely.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to get into some specifics all around, but Jason, I did introduce you, VP of Comms at. All right, wonderful, thank you, and forgive the handle there. But so the lens you give that I think is interesting, Jason, is both you guys have a portfolio of companies. You guys make investments. So I have to feel like you track and see a whole bunch of companies, how much the recruiting side becomes a dominant need for any company. You also, as a storyteller yourself, have to be thinking about this, both for BFTP. So just kind of honestly, call nonsense on me, but how much is the storytelling around team building grown in your kind of tenure?
It's funny. I think about that a lot. The importance of it, or the perceived importance of storytelling around team building for smaller companies. And when I say small, I'm thinking 1 to 10 people. At that scale of company, it is still most critical to build any sort of brand by shipping good product and building good client relationships. At that scale of company, you're talking about so many more intimate connections with team, where there is a leap of faith that teams will have at that size, where they acknowledge that, okay, if it's a team of 10, I'm not going to be getting the same direct career opportunities for growth as I would be with a corporation of 10 or 50,000 people. All of those benefits aren't there. So I have to lead a little bit more with passion. But once it starts getting, let's say, 10 to roughly 30 people, that's when it goes, okay, I don't have beers with the founder and the core team every night. I'm actually I have a different relationship with the organization. It's when the organization starts to formalize separate audiences, really. I mean, brand, for every way that anyone uses brand, if you swap in the word reputation, that works the same. And a reputation that an organization has with employees is different than it has with clients. There is a large team, small teams don't have it because, chef, cook, and bottle washer is the de rigueur for teams that are 10 or less. But when you start getting bigger, that's when you have to actually acknowledge your internal customers as well as your external customers. And Mandy, you said it right. If your internal customers can't say good things about the experience, they won't and they don't. And everyone hears it, whether you want them to or not.
This theme that you guys are all kind of hitting on, that it's not separate. When I think for a while, the recruiting and team building, for as much as we talked about people mattering, I do think a decade ago, at least from my reporting memory, I do not remember. I think it was more lip service around how important the team was for
Yes.
most folks. Of course, there was exceptions, but I think now people have really felt it. It's both on the software side, but the transformation I think we've seen is it's all roles now. It's sales and marketing, it's product and project management. We're hiring people. It's about the story people tell. 2007, 2008, 2009, we started that talk of the Glassdoor effect. Glassdoor was deserves a lot of credit early on in the reputation management of firms, and now it's gone so much wider. Talk to me a little bit about, maybe honestly, all three of you guys have perspectives on this. How much can this be intentional? We want to tell a story versus what are people already saying about this place that we just have to amplify? Is that a conversation you guys are having?
Yeah, it is. But it's very much a chicken or the egg conversation. It's like brand marketers want every story to be genuine and organic, as in you just walk down the hall and pluck the individual on your staff that had the perfect thing to say. And gosh, their experience is great, but it takes work to get there. And it takes so much work. It's funny. Everyone wants their content marketing to be genuine, and everyone wants their story to grow in a genuine fashion. But when you ask for genuine too many times, it really looks like you're asking for something that's not there. So you do have to get comfortable with letting the stories gradually emerge. But you're absolutely right. And I think when people confuse culture and brand a lot, your clients don't see culture at all. They receive the benefits of good culture, but they don't see it. They don't get to see it. And ultimately, most of your clients will not care about your culture as long as you are shipping the right product that serves your right needs at the right price point and your relationship to them is kept up. There's a lot of fantastic organizations that are insanely client committed that don't treat their internal clients very well. So a lot of times when you have too much content that leans on that, when you ask for content to do that work, it just doesn't do it well because you are literally faking it. And that just doesn't come off well.
I'll say, I think that I'm excited to see that trend changing a little bit that you just touched on, Jason, where procurement teams are now asking about, they're caring about who they're doing business with. And I'm hoping that trend continues. But now when we see procurement questionnaires coming through, they care about, how well represented your team is. They care about how employees feel about working there. And I think it's just starting, but I'm hopeful, personally, being in the people space, that that's something that continues and that kind of raises the tide, or whatever that saying is, for all the boats. I'm mixing metaphors, probably something terrible here, but
well, and to that point, it's like that notion. There is a change that says, the change I'm most excited about is a change that says people that are hired into an organization are not hired because they can eventually become the right member of the new team. They're hired because of their experience brings new insights to what the organization wants to do. That's a perfect scenario. And if that can come forward, that's great. You have people on your team, but sometimes there's different experience levels, and it might just be the person and their personal commitments. It's good to see that come through. It is really good to see that come through now. And that can only help. That can only help good HR teams close the new clients that are internal hires.
So let's get into some tactics. So a conversation like obvious but worth mentioning is, people don't stay at organizations forever. And I think logically we actually think that's okay. But if we assume great employer brand marketing tends to be on a story from actual employees, I think that means you end up choosing people who might not work at your organization someday. And I think there is in a lot of like HR or ops or like even just like CEOs, there's this fear of like, am I going to pick someone and they're going to say what a great place this is, and then they're going to leave, and then like the person I chose to be my spokesperson now is acknowledged actually it's not that great. I wonder if we could talk, like maybe disabuse some of that notion, or like just talk, Mawulom, I know you've done a lot of thinking through a lot of years on this. I have to feel like you have thoughts. How do you pick the right champion for your brand? And how do you acknowledge the reality that it's probably don't need everyone to stay forever? That's not normal. Talk a little bit about how you pick great employees to represent your brand in a more formal way.
Thank you. And in a more formal way, it's about building the structure to actually qualify these individuals. So, Chris, I see your eyes. Are you hearing me twice again?
Oh, I wasn't. I was actually looking at my question notes. Sorry.
Okay, that works well.
My questions are on the screen, but thank you for calling attention to that.
Of course. I mean, that's always nice. But in terms of the formal process is really understanding the company. So at every organization I've been to, I actually do informal interviews where I talk to employees to identify what's working at the company. What is it that works? What is it that needs to be changed? What is their overall perspective? And then I connect with my network of trusted individuals that are outside of our organization to distill what their thought of the corporate brand is. And then from there, I have enough signal where I can partner with marketing or people to highlight the things that we want to share and reduce the things or change the things that don't align well. When it comes to individuals that we bring in, my goal is to support individuals to live out their professional goals. And if that means that they're going to work at the organization for a short or a long term, great. But the goal is that they will come in, be empowered, and then leave with more than they came in. And although having someone on your website that's representing your brand leave and having to change that is a bit of work. I think it's if you do it right, you'll have a brand ambassador. You'll have someone that swam in the waters that you've created, that values your organization, that will then further market and share stories that bridge the gap with others that don't understand what your brand is or are not known to your brand. So in my mind, it's purely about empowerment and doing what's best for both sides, the organization as well as the individual.
I mean, honestly, there's a little chat. This chat here is sort of where I'm going. That, like, do you? I think Jason's on this too. We want it to be authentic, and we want everything to emerge, come from the earth, entirely naturally. And I think, of course, it has to be honest and authentic. But I think any of us recognize there's a degree of narrative formation that takes place, and I think there's an honest conversation we have to have there of like, hey, this is a narrative that our employees do say. There's very structured ways to define an employee value proposition. There's very formal surveying. There's lots of resources out there. You should look at them. You can survey a team, and how do we talk about this? How do we view, what do we think is great about working? And you can see patterns, but then you often are trying to find someone who represents that pattern. And that is a degree of work. The pattern might come out of the woodwork. Often I've even heard employees don't that they would be a valuable story to be told. And so like there's a push of like, no, we think you're a great story. So I wonder, like, Mandy, what is that like inside when you go to someone and say, would you feel comfortable telling your story because we think you represent well? Or, just talk about that process of really finding those stories.
There's a strategy is a little bit of, what are the roles that we're most likely to need to hire, where people could see themselves working here. So, using our technically employee spotlights as an example, the folks we chose are roles that we anticipate growing, our SDR team. So we profiled our first SDR who really has seen the company through our rapid growth. We profiled one of our engineering managers. Our team our code, we're written in Clojure, which is like a really niche language. So why is that interesting? So we kind of helped them to craft, to help them tell their story, but it was all based on their unique experiences. And so we chose folks that we knew had sort of a compelling story to tell, and a unique perspective, but also roles that we know we're going to kind of have almost evergreen as we really continue our growth pattern.
Jason, while I'm like, much is storytelling an act as opposed to a
It's when it's done well, it's a discovery. The market can tell when it's an act really quickly, and your employees can too. I've seen it. I've seen it go well. I've seen it go poorly. My hands have been on the wheel in both circumstances, so I could say that with authority. But it really, I mean, yeah, for me, it comes down to not being able to fake it, but that also comes to when you have a team that feels genuinely engaged and supported and cared for by the organization. Faking's not really necessary, because even if they find it uncomfortable to draw attention on them, which most of my team does at Ben Franklin, they really are. Most of the time, it's head down, get the marketing guy out of the way so we can just get our work done and make the clients happy, and that's good. When the culture is good, they're willing to lean in a little bit more. And they're willing to give a little bit more. They're willing to bridge that gap of comfort and come forward and be a part of it. But some employees it's too much of a burden to ask everyone to be a brand marketer. But that notion of having everybody, however short or long their tenure is in the organization, they need to be able to say not just not bad things, but optimal is to have them say good things. Not everyone has, when they leave, not everyone has to stay forever. I mean, I look at my own path in my career, and there's not a single instance of the company that I was part of that exists in this day. That is a very common path for technology-focused ventures. You cannot expect the company to be the same in 2 years, 5 years, whatever. This is not that market. This is not that economy, and this is not that sector. So what they do know, and they will say, is, did those people genuinely seem to care for me? And if that is true, I will continue to say good things about the organization and the people that were a part of it.
Partly agree. On the discovery aspect of things, and the fact that when you're quote unquote faking, it's noticeable. So my approach over the years has been to get to know folks, and then whenever I hear a compelling story, I yearn to get that story shared. But it has to be for a purpose. What is the overall impact? Let's say recently I connected with a colleague that shared their story. To me, it was a remarkable, life-changing story. It motivated me. I actually shared it with our daughters, and they were motivated by it. So that gave me signal that this person would tremendously impact the world, not just our organization, but could really provide a positive mental roadmap for individuals that can see themselves reflected there. So I think about that more than anything else. Yes, we want employees to say good things, but more importantly, we want employees to say the true things, what's working. Because, I mean, we've all seen it in corporations where things aren't being shared, and then an event happens and then it has to be cleaned up. So feedback, whether it's seen as positive or negative, for me is so critical. And the stories that we share, as you say, Chris, I actually have a sticky note here that says the shortest distance between two people is a story. Be vulnerable, share from your heart. And I keep that there just to remind me to come down, to come down and be present and be myself and connect with people, whether they're my colleagues, candidates, and in a way that's reflective of how I would treat them if I met them in the street.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's technology's poet and talent.
I was going to say that actually made me tear up a little bit. I'm not exaggerating. So that was beautiful. I'm going to feel it too. Be inspired by it. But I think we're all hammering on the same point. It's just if you feel, if your team believes what they're saying, and it's real, then you are doing the right thing. And also when the team can speak to the less glamorous parts of working where you are, like everybody has stuff of their day-to-day that is less glamorous, that is not as exciting. So when I review job descriptions, I usually take it down a notch, like to say, let's be really truthful around what this day-to-day will look like. They need to be able to read our job descriptions and get, you know, a pretty clear vision of what their day-to-day is going to look like in the company, whether that's a, you know, many hats role, and that means it's going to be, so you're going to need to be somebody who thrives and likes to create order, or whether it's a more, you know, kind of programmed role where there's more repetitive work, like tell them that. And then you're not only going to be truthful of what the experience is going to be, but hopefully get the right candidate in if you also are balancing the excitement that you have for this role in the company with the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd add to that and just say that as marketers, we have a tendency sometimes to really hang on to a story that we think is going to set the world on fire. And we don't always love to hear it when a potentially really good qualified hire says, I don't actually understand what you do. I know what you're asking for, but I don't know where you're getting to. So that's bracing, but we need to hear it. We need to hear from the people that we want to impress that maybe sometimes they're not always impressed.
It's two stories that you guys are making me think of. We put this in a report of ours earlier this year, but the old recruiting joke of bring the candidate down to, devil brings the candidate down to hell, feels great, free beer, food tables out, everyone looks nice. People always oversell. Hell's not that bad. You should come down. Candidate dies, chooses hell. Like, actually, it was way better than I thought. Shows up, and hell's terrible. Fire, getting poked, and guys goes, devil, what the hell happened? I just came by to the site visit. It seemed great. And it's like, oh, we were just recruiting you, son. And like, the joke is that obviously a lot of recruiters, hiring managers, teams, like take that approach, even if they don't really intentionally, but they gloss over everything that is negative. They tell what they think is the most captivating story, like regardless of whether it's true. And what you guys are hitting on reminds me a ton of a principle in journalism. And John, actually, I'm seeing your note here, and I want to hit on that. But that, like, the responsibility of journalism is typically to find the true and make it interesting, but also make sure that which is interesting is also true. And you need both. And what that means is, as I think Mandy hit on, all organizations challenging or like different, like that's why we all make life choices. You know, there's always gonna be something that's not perfect. So employer brand marketing is not like, let's make up a bunch of lies. It is find what is the truest narrative about the people who are happy. What the people who all agree on. That's surveying that you should be doing if you haven't already. It should be talking to people, as Mawulom said. What is just common? Everyone seems to like this. Okay, that seems to be the beginning of our EVP, our employee value proposition. Let's begin to tell that story. That's what people like. So I think that's helpful. And John's note on being genuine is true. Yeah, Michaela asked a question here that Jason, you touched on, you guys. As every company grows, you're gonna fire people, or they're gonna be people who have a rotten experience, have hired the wrong person for the wrong role. 1,000 things it's just gonna happen. Wondering, as an employer brand marketing, how much do you listen to negative feedback? How much do you incorporate it? How much do you just avoid it? And I don't think there is a simple answer there, but I'm just curious from past roles. Any thoughts on like what you do when you see that first super negative Glassdoor review, or that like the angry tweet, or you just know in an exit interview that someone's leaving not feeling they're super happy about the organization? Any points you'd give to folks about thinking about that?
I would suggest leaning in, and by that I mean feedback is from my framing is just feedback. If you imagine driving a car, you're looking at the speedometer, you're going 100 miles per hour. That's neither good or bad unless you think about unless you see an officer, or you think you see the speed limit, or your car isn't actually a good. I think about my first car. That car going 100 miles per hour was a little bit of a death trap. right? So unless you provide your own meaning to it, then it's just feedback. So I would lean in to uncover exactly what the person actually means. Feedback is a rich data set that you can leverage to then take actions, right? If you're driving that vehicle and you see the speedometer, you can then step on the brake and slow down. You bring yourself safe. So whether it's positive or negative, I would like that feedback. And I think organizations that lean into feedback can then have an opportunity, because now you can then share what you've learned. And if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, I share that I build teams and share what I learned, because you're going to quote unquote make mistakes. That's just the nature of life. As you grow, as your organization scales, there's going to be gaps that you have not yet filled. And that feedback is just letting you know that, hey, there's a gap there and you may want to fill it. And if you take the time to really understand it, then not only can you fill it, but then you can present it to that individual and let that person or that group know that not only do you care about them, but you're taking actionable steps to address their concern. And to me, that brings you closer. That's similar to the inflection points that we go through as humans. And what happens when we get through them? We get closer, we get bonded, and we become more.
Keep it coming, Mawulom.
A tough act to follow, but but I would just say too, you know, we try really hard. I think hopefully we all do, but to live by, you know, the age old like newspaper test. Like if the circumstances around this person's departure aren't something that we feel, privacy notwithstanding, of course, but like that story, if it got out, would be damaging, then we're doing something wrong as a company. There are times when somebody leaves for personal reasons, or or maybe they're not aligned with our values or our industry, and that's an okay reason for somebody to take a step away. But listening to the feedback and feeling confident that everything that you've done behind the scenes is defensible, is you're proud of the way that you handle the situation, translates to that employer brand. So then when you get that negative Glassdoor review, you can respond, also give yourself a day before you respond to Glassdoor reviews, is my, and have someone else look at them. But you know, really just being comfortable with the decisions you're making. Again, it all comes back to, if you're doing it right, it'll be pretty easy to tell the story. And if you feel proud of the decisions you've made as a leadership team.
Noting folks have got questions in the chat, but actually I realized there was a Q&A here that I missed. There also is a Q&A function. I feel very overwhelmed with adding recruitment marketing to all the other things that I do. So I wonder if we just talk a little bit about just the logistics of what do we mean by employer brand marketing. We have, what does that mean? And I think we've seen people, smaller firms, it just means, hey, the founder, CEO, or an operations person is occasionally tweeting the photo of the staff getting together. That is in some sense, employer brand marketing. Then obviously teams grow, and sometimes the recruiting or HR team ends up adding folks with who have that main purview. At some point, you might have people with a dedicated title. Just wondering, like, of any size company, I think we know larger companies that don't have this function. Any early steps or things that for you feel like an attainable real life action of beginning your employer brand marketing? What are some of those steps that to you are crucial approaches, time savers that get it done right and authentically and well, but attainably?
Not just getting the work done, but making sure the whole team knows that the work is getting done and everyone is pulling their weight and everyone needs to get it done. I mean, that's honestly, when you're talking about smaller teams, I mean, and we even see it with our organization at Ben Franklin. It's, we bobble right between that, at that spot where I just mentioned is dangerous of 30 people when it feels like a small intimate team and it's becoming a large team. It's hard then to communicate that everyone is doing their things and everyone is doing their things well and everyone is part of an organic thing that is moving well. But you got to do it. And you have to make sure that the team, from all of its capacities, whether it's your lead in business development or the accounting person that would really rather not be seen visibly, that wants to just sit down and get their work done, that person has to be acknowledged, not in a way that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. They have to be acknowledged, and their contributions to the whole have to be shared. Unless you're doing, And that's what it's coming down to. That's the experience you deliver to your employees. That's the brand promise you deliver to your staff, your teams. If you don't do that, that's how it starts. It starts with having a good experience that those people want to share. Brand marketing is nothing more than that. It's the promise of a good experience. It's having a good experience and then telling people about the good experience. So it's an oversimplified look at how it's all done. Without a good experience in the middle, the first and third parts don't matter.
I agree. And Chris, you and I have talked about this in the past. I love process folks. I think when you put a good process together, you can go a long way. So one thing I would suggest is add it to your stride. When I joined LTSE, we did this cool thing where when anyone joined, they would share their biography or just do an introduction. And we then took that and took it from an internal formal process and then turned it into something that we can share with the world. I truly believe that a talent brand is simply the sum of the individuals that you have in your organization. Social media is a thing, folks. So letting the folks that you have in your organization share their stories internally, and then having the ones that opt into having these stories shared externally. And if you have a larger organization, find ways to actually highlight the individuals that have been in your organization for quite some time, especially if you're starting this. So you can build a process that allows you to share feedback in a regular cadence with the team, and then take the overall stories that you're hearing and share it in a regular cadence as well. Why? Because as Jason said, things get busy in mid-stage and early stage startups, and having processes in place that highlight your brand in a way that's authentic to you allow you to add it to your stride and perhaps even normalize the stories within your culture. I think that it's deeply important to share narratives that can be shared over and over again. When I conduct employer interviews that are informal and I hear the same story from 5 people, that's a narrative that has gone through the organization. So I'll pause there because I believe Mandy is going to give us some amazing insights, and I want to make sure we hear it.
No, that's quite the setup. But yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about this too, like the employer branding and how it's evolved over the past 3 years. So what we came back to was one of the very first things we did at Crossbeam was Bob and Buck and I sat around the table and really put a lot of time and thought into our values. And so at that point in the game, like that's the basis of our employer brand. It's the basis of everything that we do. My cat's about to walk across the keyboard. So that was like step one. And at that point, I think what that means in retrospect is that our employer brand at that point was aspirational. It was, we didn't know yet, right? Like we were very small. We were very early. The folks that we got brought on early were people that, took that leap early on, and then it's evolved as we've gone, and now it's more representative of the actual experience. But early on, you have to be okay with saying, this is our aspiration, this is the kind of workplace we want to have, and then hire people in that vision. And then as you go, sort of checking in with yourself to say, are we still living this? Is this still reflective of what the experience is here? I'm glad to say that at Crossbeam, we've found that we keep coming back to our values to make decisions on hires, on product decisions, on everything. And so I feel like we did a good job, but it's going to be an ongoing learning as the team grows.
Mm-hmm. Love that. I mean, and you've got to do it too and tell those early employees that it's on them to build this culture. That to the right hires, that's a really exciting thing to do, right? I mean, you don't want to jump into something that's fully formed. You want to be a part of forming it.
Mm-hmm. I think that is well said, and a couple of the tactical questions in there. Like, yeah, I think the theme I heard from the few of you is do something that you can stick to. So there are firms that are going to staff up a bunch, and you can add teams. So let's start building a foundation or effort, and this is going to be dedicated to a recurring employee. We're going to do create editorial, sales-oriented content marketing. That's path. But if you're staying somewhat small, that might be unnecessary, and some light social here and there do the job. So you probably really want to know what's the DNA of your organization. If you're a larger organization, we've seen on the corporate level this be a mix of team specific, working in partnership with HR. When you get 100, 500, 1,000 employees, we're seeing that sometimes the individual teams do want to have independence in that voice, but you're going to have to work with central HR. Those are all points. We're coming up on time, and the goal for this was to try to give some real specific takeaways of what folks can actually arm with. And I think we've done some. Stick to what you can maintain. Make sure you're starting with a foundation, your organizational values. Actually interview employees, hear what they're actually saying. I think John said it well earlier in the chat there of like people who left are, they are also helpful. Your alumni network is powerful. What do people remember about you, or what do they not want to remember about you? They're important. Mandy, Mawulom, Jason, I wonder if you guys help send me out with like anything else that you would want to arm people with, or that you're thinking about yourself about doing employer brand marketing, metrics, tactics. Just send us the stuff that we should be thinking about as we wrap up.
Touch on the thing that you said earlier, Chris, about, I think it was Chris, get the survey out there, like just do it. I think I would have liked to have launched ours even sooner than we did. We just wrapped our second one, but like that will give you the confidence that you need to feel, like you can really tell the story and pull out those nuggets of what makes your workplace unique. So if you're faltering on that, just do it and get the feedback so you can start acting on it and be true to the actual experience.
Well said.
Plus one on that, and plus that, and adding that, I would highly recommend doing regular digital audits and just getting insights into what your brand looks like externally. So outside of internal employee interviews, get insights into what the external market says, and then create a system where you can leverage that feedback to take action. It's great to have this information, but if you're not acting on it, then there's less value there. And lastly, everything that you can possibly get from an individual gives you insights into who they are in that moment, what they think. And it's less about your brand and more about the perspective that you're receiving in that one moment.
Good. For me, there's no dollar that I've spent as a marketer that has been better than the experience the team delivers the client. No dollar. And if you lose sight of that, whatever your brand story may be for your enterprise, if that is at odds with the experience that the team is producing for the clients, internal and external clients, it doesn't work. So either right size the story or right size or level up the team. Both have to happen. That the best way. So there is always the opportunity for growth.
Well said. All right, friends, we're at time. Thank you so much. It's been a conversation on real life tips on employer brand marketing. This will get recapped technically with some other detailed and specific stuff that you can hopefully be armed with and go from there. You get a break now. Next session's at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're almost toward the end of the day. So thanks for being here, friends, and we'll talk to you. Mandy, Mawulom, and Jason, thanks so much. Talk soon.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Cool. Thanks, Chris.